Hey everyone, this is Barrett from Cypress College, and in this lab recording today, we're going to cover the Introduction to AWS Key Management Service, or KMS. And this is going over one of the free labs that's available through Qwiklabs. So essentially what we're going to be doing, if we go down to topics covered, we're going to create an encryption key. We're going to enable CloudTrail, and then at the same time create an S3 bucket where those CloudTrail logs are going to be sent to. We'll upload some data to that new S3 bucket. We're going to show how the encryption key works with that. And then finally, towards the end of the lab, we're going to monitor that encryption key usage and see how we can actually look into CloudTrail and see our interactivity with that based on the encryption key ID, and also looking for the image that we uploaded to the S3 bucket, for example. So I'm going to go ahead and move this over, and we'll just dive right on into the management console. So the first thing we're going to want to do is hop into KMS, and you could see it quite possibly in recently visited services, or you can even just search for KMS and you will find Key Management Service here. So first thing we want to do is create a key. And this one will be a symmetric key. We won't need to do anything under advanced options here. We'll just click on next, give it an alias of my first key, and always good to leave a description for what the key is being used for. So in this case, it's going to be a KMS key for S3 data. All right, we'll click next. Now, this is the important part too. This is where you define key administrative permissions and also define key usage permissions. So in this case, if you look in the top right corner, we're logged in as AWS student. So this is what we're going to want to give administrative permissions to. And then we select next. We're going to also define key usage permissions, meaning that AWS student can also use this key. So we want to check that as well, and then press next. And then finally, you have a review summary of the things we just did. Also, definitely highly encourage you to look over the key policy. You can see it's defining the principal root account that's going to allow the KMS resource to be used. And then down here, you see the principal of the AWS student is allowed access for key administrators. You see it gives us all of the actions required for that. And then finally, allow use of the key. This is specifically for only our AWS student principal. And then once again, we have all the necessary actions needed. Okay, so you just go ahead and press finish there. And here we have my first key. Now we're going to want to copy this key ID because we're going to use it later on in the lab. Remember when I mentioned we're going to actually go through CloudTrail logs and look for the usage of this specific key. So I'm just going to open up Notepad and drop that in there so that we can come back to it later on. But of course, you could always just come back to KMS if you forget to note it down. You could always just come back to KMS and you could see your key ID right here. Okay, so moving on to task 2. We want to go over to CloudTrail. And first, when you log into this, likely on this lab, you're going to get a couple warnings. Don't worry about these. Remember, sometimes these labs, because you're working on kind of free tier, sometimes some things aren't accessible, but you can just exit out of these. It's not going to affect the lab in any way. But we'll go ahead and create a new trail. We'll give this a name of my trail. And we want to create a new S3 bucket at the same time. So let's go ahead and rename this. So remember, S3 buckets are global, meaning each name has to be unique. So we could say, we can call this my CloudTrail bucket. Now, if I tried to name it this is likely taken. So I'm just going to add a number after it. And the lab is asking to disable log file encryption, which honestly, in the real world, I would leave that enabled, but they may just want it enabled for simplicity's sake in this lab. This is where you could also configure CloudWatch logs, which is also a really good best practice when you're enabling CloudTrail. We're not going to do it now, but just wanted to point out that this is what will allow CloudWatch to monitor your trail logs and notify you on specific activities. So this is always really good to enable, but that will be for another time. Now let's see, so we click on next. And then for event types, we want to gather all management events, data events, and insight events. And then we can scroll down all the way to the bottom, click next, and then this is just a review of what we just set. So we'll go ahead and create that trail. Now, that basically just created a new S3 bucket for us at the same time. So that will take us to step 3, and we'll move over to S3, step 3 for S3. And here you can see we have our new bucket that we just created. So my CloudTrail bucket 31337. So I'm going to go ahead and remember, your number will be different than mine, of course, just some random number, but it would start with my CloudTrail bucket. So I'm going to go ahead and enter into my bucket. You can see that it's already is creating AWS logs. So the way that CloudTrail logs are stored, they're in zipped format, and they're not in here yet, but eventually as we start to use AWS services and we're making API calls, it will eventually, whoops, that was weird. There we go. It will eventually start populating folders based on the month. And, or actually, I'm sorry, I think it goes the year and then the month and then the day. And it will just keep adding in these logs as the days go by. So anyways, we'll see that in just a little bit. But the first thing we want to do is go all the way back to the main My CloudTrail bucket. And let's just go ahead and upload a file. So I'm going to select upload. Let me see, I have an image called Invisible Bike Cat that I'm going to upload to this S3 bucket. And now we want to go down to properties, scroll all the way down to server side encryption settings. So let's go ahead and specify an encryption key. And we're not going to use an S3 key, but we want to use KMS. Because remember, we just created our own key in the first task. And we want to choose from your AWS KMS keys. And here you see we have my first key. So now we are encrypting this specific image with the encryption key that we created in the first part of the lab. Okay, if we scroll down to the bottom, click upload, that was successful. And the lab is asking, let's see, we'll go back to our main CloudTrail bucket. And then the lab is asking to copy down this last modified. This will also come in handy when we're eventually looking through CloudTrail logs. You'll find out why in a bit. So I'm just going to note that down there. Okay, so that takes us on to task 4. And we want to just be inside of our bucket here. We see the image that we uploaded. Obviously, your image will probably be different, but for mine, I'm using Invisible Bike Cat. So now let's see if we can open this. So I'm just going to click the checkbox, choose open, and there we have it, my image displayed. Now, what happens if we copy the URL and just try to access this via, our web browser, new tab? You can see that we receive access denied. And this is because we're essentially trying to access it outside of our AWS account. Even though we technically are logged in here, but it's not accessing it through the management console. We're just trying to directly connect to this. So that is giving us access denied, which is a good thing, right? We wouldn't want anybody to just gain access to that. And to further kind of see the benefits of encryption, even if we came into permissions and disabled this block public access, which is always, this is what's enabled by default on S3 buckets. You really only disable this for very specific business use cases, or if you're wanting to host a static website through S3. But you just have to be careful about what else is in that bucket, because when this is disabled, unless you have other defense in depth, other layers of security like encryption in place with the appropriate bucket policies, or I should say encryption key policies, then, public access can be much easier for somebody to find things that you maybe don't want them to. But in this case, let's go ahead and disable this. So you have to type confirm. They really want to make sure that you definitely know you want to do this for a specific use case. So now that we've done that, let's go back to our bucket, my CloudTrail buckets. And let's even make this image public. Okay, so we've now made that image public as well. I'm gonna go and close out of here. Now let's go ahead and click on this again. Let's copy that URL and let's see, even though we've made that public, we disabled block public access, can we access it? No, we cannot. And that is because we have that encryption key in place. So you can see how encryption is a great way to add an additional layer of security, even if there's a misconfiguration in that, oops, this S3 bucket became public. Well, and so somebody from the outside still can't access these because they're encrypted. So it's protecting the confidentiality of these files. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close out of that. And so now this takes us into task 5, where we're actually going to, now that we've been working with KMS, we've been making calls to the S3 bucket. Well, we've definitely generated some log information. So now we're going to dive into monitoring that. So back in the main My CloudTrail bucket, remember I said earlier that CloudTrail logs go into this AWS logs folder. What is listed here is actually your account ID. And then we want to go into CloudTrail. And so now that logs have been created, it splits them up by region first. So we want to double check which region this lab was launched in. I'm pretty sure it's US West 2 or Oregon, but to do that, we can just load up the console home in a new tab. And true enough, we are in US West 2 or Oregon. So what that means is we want to look in the US West 2 folder here for the CloudTrail logs. So I'm going to click into there. The year is 2021. It is currently the month of October when I'm recording this video, and it happens to be on the 24th day. So now you see we have a few different logs. You see the sizes of them. And this is where the timestamp that we took earlier might come in handy. We could see that it was around 1649 when we uploaded that image. So I'm going to try and select something. These all obviously occurred after that. We'll just go ahead and select this first one. Press open. And now what we could do, we could reference this key ID. I'm going to copy this. And I'm just going to do a good old Control F in my browser and then paste that in. So you could see here, we have the log data of us interfacing with our bucket. And also, this is from when we were uploading that invisible by cat.jpg or whichever image you happen to be uploading on your side. So you can see this is kind of the raw output for CloudTrail logs, but there are a lot of great tools out there that will take these logs and create like nice dashboards. You could essentially send these into SIM tools like Splunk to create nice dashboards and to really create, to really take action on this information for quick snapshots of your environment and things that are happening within it. Okay, so with that, that takes us into task 6, manage encryption keys. And then this is basically just going to show us how, if we really wanted to, we could either remove users from a key. We could add other users to it as well. So remember, this was the first key that we created. If we click into here, and if we scroll down, we can see key users. Now, what if we wanted to say we wanted to remove AWS student? Well, you simply check the box, click remove, and now that, we actively would not be able to use that key anymore. Now, if you ever wanted to add, you just simply click add, and then we'll go ahead and add that back there. So pretty straightforward, pretty easy to add new users who might need access to a specific key. And so that wraps up this lab. Definitely encourage you to play around with it. After maybe you disable key users, go back in there and try and access it again, see how it might give you some errors. Feel free to play around, but that is essentially everything. So I'm going to go ahead and sign out of here and then end my lab on Qwiklabs. So hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.